Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another tank review. This time we're going to be looking at the Tier 8 German heavy tank, the Tiger II. Before we get into that, however, this will be the first review I have done in patch 9.15, and so if I make one or two mistakes here or there with the interface, I apologise in advance. Also worth noting, before we continue too far with this, for those who haven't noticed, Wargaming have rejigged how stats are displayed in the garage and which stats are or are not displayed. So, over here on the right hand side, where we just used to have a list of numbers, we now have kind of firepower, survivability, mobility, concealment and spotting. So, I mean, these are fairly self-explanatory, but they're given as values out of 1000. So, just to show you, for example, what the most heavily armoured all-round tank in the game, the Maus, is given a survivability rating of 998 out of 1000. So that's very high. So you can see at a quick glance where a tank tends to excel and not, which I think is a really nice feature. If you click on that, however, it gives you in detail information about that particular category for this machine. So, for example, this is giving you detailed information about the firepower of the machine, so mainly related to the gun, and these stats are for your specific tank setup. And so, because I have a 100% crew, I have vertical stabilizers, vents, and a gun rammer on my Tiger II, these stats are better than the ones you get just by hovering over the gun. Okay, so that's a really nice feature and should make this whole process a little bit easier. There's a couple of other things they've changed. For example, if you hover your cursor over a gun, for instance in the tech tree, it shows you in green the things that get better, in red the things that get worse, and included in that is the overall category, in this case firepower, that would change and how it would change. So that's really quite interesting. I do like that feature, so that you can quickly see at a glance what has changed about your machine. So, with that said, let's go on and actually have a look at the Tiger II. Now, as usual, before we talk about the tank in the game, just going to give a wee little bit of history about this machine. So, for anyone who doesn't know, this was a German heavy tank that was introduced toward the end of the Second World War. It was a continuation of the heavy tank program that had been started actually in the late 30s. And that led to the development of the Tiger I tank from the Henschel company, and there were calls put out for a new heavy tank to supersede that, and again you had competing designs from the Porsche and Porsche and Henschel companies, and once again the Henschel design won out. The Porsche design is what would become the VK4502P Aufst A and B, and the Henschel design was named the Tiger B, or the Tiger II, sometimes referred to as the Bengal Tiger, King Tiger, Queen's Tiger. It goes by a variety of different names, many of them, or some of them rather, inaccurate or mistranslations of the original German name. But nonetheless, this is the machine that we're talking about. It was introduced toward the end of the Second World War, and that kind of impacted severely on how much of a role this thing could actually play in the war. So basically, what the Germans did with this tank is they had a new machine that was bigger, badder, and heavier than anything that the Allies could field, in the same way that the Tiger I, when it was introduced, was bigger, badder, and heavier than anything that the Allies could come up against. It was the main improvements, if you will, over the Tiger I were that it took the flat armoured plates of the Tiger I and put them at a considerable angle. So visually, the hull doesn't look too dissimilar to, for example, the Panther, that played with the idea of sloped armour. And it took the 88mm gun mounted in the Tiger I and replaced it with a longer barreled 88mm gun, which is not actually the gun I have mounted here, but visually they're fairly similar. And so basically it had a bigger gun and better armour than its predecessor. However, if you compare it to the Tiger I, the Tiger II was very much more of the same. And the problem is that wasn't really going to save the Germans at that stage in the war. So if you think about it, Although there were targets that could penetrate the Tiger I fairly reliably, you know, we're talking about things like the IS, the M26 Pershing, the Sherman Firefly, the Comet and Centurion when they were introduced, you know, a variety of these tanks that could penetrate the Tiger I. Most of the targets that the tank was coming up against, most of the tank targets that the Tiger was coming up against, was still the T-34s and the Shermans, and tanks that really had trouble penetrating it. So the armor upgrade from the Tiger I to the Tiger II, honestly, not that important. Yes, it gave the tank additional protection from some field guns and some of the larger anti-tank guns used by the Allies, but the fact remains that the 17-pounder was still capable of penetrating the Tiger II's armour, albeit from a much closer range than the Tiger I, and generally speaking you wanted to be firing a better, if you will, ammunition type, a specialised ammo type, armour-piercing discarding sabot, which would be in the game as APCR. But also, honestly, if the Allies really wanted to, at this point in the war, they basically had air superiority. And so any particularly troublesome target, you could just have the United States Air Force, you know, the USAF, the RAF, or the VVS come over, depending on what front you're on, and bomb the bejesus out of you. And it doesn't matter how much armour you have, you know, a 250-pound bomb to the face will offend. And so the armour upgrade wasn't really all that important, in my opinion. Add to that the fact that at this stage in the war, German steel is of an inferior quality to the early war steel that they had available, and as a result, the hits to the Tiger II tended to cause a lot of spalling inside, where you get these shards of metal flying around inside the tank. And so you may not penetrate the Tiger's formidable armour, but the spalling could just injure or kill the crew inside, and obviously a tank with no crew is, well, absolutely useless. Not only that, of course, regardless of what tank you are in, if someone knocks out your tracks or damages your gun, they don't have to penetrate the hull or turret armour to do that, and that effectively takes you out of the engagement. So honestly, the armour upgrades weren't that useful. In fact, there was one case where a Tiger II was hit at least 8 times from the front by the M3 90mm gun found on the M36 Jackson. None of the shots penetrated the hull or turret of the Tiger II, but one shot damaged the muzzle brake here at the end of the gun, and as a result the tank was unable to fight back, and so the crew abandoned the machine. The reality was that you didn't need to penetrate the Tiger II in order to take it out. So the armour upgrade wasn't that important, and yes, the gun was very powerful and can knock out Allied tanks with one shot from kilometres away, far outside their own effective ranges. However, well, other German guns could do that too. The Panther or the Tiger I were both perfectly capable of killing a Sherman or a T-34 from a very, very long way away, and if you were willing to bring the engagement ranges down a little bit, the 75mm gun on the Panzer IV was perfectly capable of dealing with most of the tanks it encountered, the Shermans, the T-34s and whatnot. The reality was that most of the time, if you were in a tank, what you were coming up against were relatively soft targets. Machine gun emplacements, field guns, you know, things like that, anti-tank positions, targets against which you would just be using high explosive, and against which the short-barreled 75 and 105mm guns found on the Panzer IV and on the Stugs were perfectly adequate for the job. You didn't need a Tiger II to do that. Add on to that the fact that much like the Tiger I, the Tiger II suffered from reliability problems. It required a very considerable amount of maintenance to keep running, especially on the Eastern Front. And it guzzled petrol like it was going out of fashion, and toward the end of the war the Germans literally ran out of petrol. And you had a machine that was formidable but it was more of the same, and it just wasn't what the Germans needed. Now, I can't think of a single thing the Wehrmacht could have done, or a single machine the Wehrmacht could have implemented, that would have saved them. Toward the end of the Second World War, the Soviets completely outnumbered them on the Eastern Front, and on the Western Front, you had the might of the American economy just churning out equipment at an alarming rate. And so at that point, the Germans were completely outgunned. But nonetheless, in my opinion at least, this, if any tank could have saved the Wehrmacht during the Second World War, this was not it. It was more of the same, and the same had not been working. Anyway, there's the history lesson for you. Let's actually look at what we get in the game. So remembering, of course, that this machine is at tier 8. So if we have a quick look at the shiny new little scores out of 1000, you can actually fairly quickly see what this tank is going to be good at and what it is not going to be good at. Firstly, the Tiger II is a big, fat, heavy tank. And so it doesn't come as a massive surprise that it gets a terrible concealment rating. The camo on this tank is pretty abysmal. If you look at that in more detail, you can see exact numbers, but without knowing the full calculation used to work out camo ratings, those numbers are not particularly helpful, but they are there, which is actually really nice to see. So this thing is not sneaky at all. Spotting gets 624, and that is because when maxed out, you get a base view range of something. It doesn't actually... Oh, wait, yes it does. A base view range of 390 meters that you can see with my setup is currently sitting at 411 meters. This is not the best in the game, but it's pretty darn good. And with the exception of the Carnarvon and the T-32, I think it's the joint best of the Tier 8 heavy tanks. The Carnarvon and the T-32 both getting 400 meters base view range. Signal range is also pretty good as well. Mobility, it's alright. It's a bit of a trade-off with the Tiger II. On the one hand, for a heavy tank, you get a fairly respectable top speed limit of 38 kilometers an hour forwards and 12 kilometers an hour going backwards. However, it's a 71-ton machine with a 700 horsepower engine, giving it a rather uninspiring power-to-weight ratio of less than 10. Combine that with things like ground resistances and whatnot, and the Tiger II is a fairly sluggish machine. If you have a hill that you're going down, or if you've got enough time to get up to speed, yeah, sure, the 38 kilometers per hour forward speed is not too bad. But it's getting up to that speed. Its agility is not very good. It's just a very sluggish machine. Survivability. Now, this is where some people might be a little bit surprised. The survivability score for this tank is relatively low. And this is something that gets played out in-game. I'm going to look at the armor profile in more detail in a moment. But basically, you have 1600 hit points, which is quite a lot for a Tier 8 heavy tank. That is toward the upper end of the scale. With 150mm of frontal hull armor, with a good angle, but counterbalanced by a pretty poor lower front plate, and 185mm of frontal turret armor, but it's fairly flat. Like I say, I will look more into the armor profile in a moment, but if you just for now take my word for it, the armor on the Tiger II is not particularly good, not for a Tier 8 heavy tank. Firepower, this is one of the strengths of the machine. This top 105mm gun is actually pretty good. If you compare it to its peers, well, let's just have a quick look at it at the moment. And just for the sake of comparison, I'm just going to look at the stats in the garage without my equipment and whatnot thrown in. 5.77 rate of fire, 320 alpha damage combined to give this machine pretty good DPM for a Tier 8 heavy tank. In fact, I think it might be in fourth place, beaten only by the Oho, the Japanese Tier 8 with the 100mm gun, which gets ludicrous DPM. Then you get the 110, the Chinese machine, then the VKA, the other German Tier 8, and then you get the Tiger II. So the DPM is actually pretty good. Dispersion at 100 meters, or accuracy, 0.31 is excellent. Penetration at 225 is, well, it's not bad, but it's pretty much standard for a tier 8 heavy tank. It's nothing too special. With premium rounds that goes up to 285, which is quite good. 2.5 second aim time, that's not great, but for a heavy tank it's not bad. And in practice this gun, again, for a heavy tank gun, this gun tends to aim fairly quickly. It's very accurate when it's fully aimed, and it's quite a reliable gun. It doesn't pack the same punch in terms of alpha damage as something like an IS-3, and it doesn't have the same raw DPM as the Japanese or Chinese machines, but it's probably one of the best all-round guns found on a tier 8 heavy tank, if we're going to be honest. It's a pretty good gun, and when you use it, it feels rather mediocre, but that's because its strengths don't lie in, you know, things like alpha damage. But it's all round, it is a pretty good gun. It's very difficult to complain about it. So let's just have a quick look at the research path for this machine. So we've already got the idea that this thing packs a good gun, dodgy mobility and armor, decent view range. That's the sort of machine you're looking at, and this will tend to lead you toward kind of long range shooting playstyle. You're not sniping from the back of the map, but if you're at longer range, your sizable weak spots on your armor are no longer as much of an issue. Your good accuracy on your gun lets you consistently hurt your opponents. You can usually make use of that good DPM rather than just having, say for example, an IS-3 poking around a corner, derping you in the face and pulling back. You know, you tend to be able to use your advantages more at longer range. So there's good news, and there's generally good news when it comes to the grind on the Tiger II. Obviously, you need to get the suspension and the turret yourself. Those things never come for free. However, you don't need the top turret in order to mount the top gun. So you can leave off the turret for a bit if you want, but for reasons that will become apparent, I don't recommend that. The top engine and the radios will carry over from the Tiger I, so you can have those already. When it comes to the guns, I would not prioritise the guns, and I wouldn't prioritise the guns because you actually have some pretty decent stock guns to do the grinding with. This is the long-barreled L71 88mm gun that the tank historically used, and this is actually the gun that is also used on the Tiger I, so you'll have this unlocked already. It's the stock gun. If you've played the VKA, then you'll already have this gun unlocked. This is the short 105mm L52 gun. It's not bad. Some people, I was about to say, some people don't like it because of its relatively poor accuracy. Honestly though, it appears at some point they've buffed this gun since I used it when I was grinding through my Tiger II. So 0.35 dispersion at 100 meters is not fantastic, but it's not that much worse than the stock 88mm gun. Both of those are perfectly viable guns, and then you get onto the top gun that we've already had a look at. I do think this is the moneymaker, but the two preceding guns are not bad at all. I know people who only used the L71 when playing the Tiger II, and they did perfectly well. So you don't, while the guns are the selling point of the Tiger II, I don't think you need to prioritise them. I would prioritise the turret. Why would I prioritise the turret? Because the stock turret has 100mm of armour at the front, which is terrible for a tier 8 heavy tank. Let's not beat around the bush here. You can take your tier 6 medium tank and punch right through that without too much difficulty. So the stock turret sucks. The fully upgraded turret, okay, the armor's flat, but 185mm of armor at least gives you protection from the lower tier targets that you're going to be coming across. So I would prioritize the turret, then the guns, and get the suspension whenever you need to make the whole thing work. But all told, the grind is actually not too bad on the Tiger II. As I say, if you played the VKA already, your grind will become a bit easier because you'll already have this middle gun, but either way, the grind is perfectly acceptable. So what about crew skills and equipment and all of that jazz? Well, for consumables, I've got your standard 3 consumables: small first aid kit, small repair kit, manual fire extinguisher. I wouldn't honestly recommend trading out for chocolate. You do occasionally lose crew members in this tank, you do take module damage, you do occasionally get set on fire, nowhere near as often as it used to. The Tiger II, along with many German tanks, had a reputation for setting on fire a lot because shots to their frontal transmission used to light them up, which they don't anymore. But some people might want to use chocolate, but I don't honestly recommend it. You can also, of course, take large versions of any of the first aid kit and whatnot, if you so wished. Engine oil, again, I wouldn't, or sorry, gasoline, again, I wouldn't really bother, personally. As for ammunition, well, I've got 5 rounds of APCR, 5 rounds of HE, and the rest armor piercing. You could probably get rid of a few of those HE rounds. I haven't found them to be colossally useful, though sometimes I imagine they would be useful. APCR, well, I leave it up to you. The good, or the excellent accuracy plus the 225 PEM means that I don't really find you have to use APCR in this tank. In fact, I don't think I've ever fired APCR in this tank, so I don't think it's a massive thing to worry about, but a few rounds may serve you well. What about equipment then? Well, one day Wargaming will get round to making all the different bits of equipment relevant on a tank, hopefully, but as it is, they're not. This is going to come as no great surprise. I would recommend a vertical stabilizer, because I recommend that on pretty much every tank that can take it. So, VertStab, number 1. 2, I recommend a gun rammer, because 10% DPM is 10% DPM. That's good. Take it. Third equipment slot, little bit up to you. I would recommend either, well, your choice of coated optics or improved vents. I've gone for vents, but I leave that up to you a little bit. Crew skills, nothing hugely surprising. Sixth Sense on your commander. I have preventative maintenance on my driver. Really, that's from back in the day when frontal shots used to count as engine damage and set you on fire and all that jazz, so I took preventative maintenance. I wouldn't bother taking it now. In fact, I'll probably retrain my driver at some point to get rid of that. Safe storage on your loader is never a bad idea, and repairs is always a good idea, especially on a heavy tank. You could also take things like situational awareness to buff up your view range, so I would recommend something like Sixth Sense on your commander, safe storage on your loader, repairs on everyone else, and go from there. Or, if you retrain for gold, start off with repairs on everyone, and then when they hit 100%, trade out for Sixth Sense and safe storage on your commander and loader respectively. Retrain those guys for repairs and go from there. Brothers in Arms is of course another option, but it's not the sort of perk and skill I tend to recommend prioritising, because you need to train it on your entire crew, and you really do need Sixth Sense. Maybe one day Wargaming will get around to rejigging the crew skills as well, but for now they have not. And so at the moment, that would be my recommendation. So I think I've whittled on long enough in the garage. Let's go and take a quick look at the module locations on this tank, armor profile, and then some gameplay. Looking at module locations now, if we look at this tank from the front, then you can see over here to the right you have the driver sitting, and frontal shots can also damage your transmission. It used to be the case that shots to frontal transmission could set your engine on fire, but that was removed. However, still counts as engine damage. Looking from the left hand side, you have a hull ammo rack here. You've got a turret ammo rack toward the back here. If you aim for the cross, I think it's the iron cross or whatever, the cross on the side of the German turret here, then you have a good chance of knocking out the commander. And you've got fuel tanks and whatnot toward the rear, which will burn nicely. From the rear we can see that rear turret ammo rack extends around to the other side of the tank, and the fuel tanks take up the back of the machine, so it will come as no surprise to see that the other side of the tank is very much the same. Only this time, shots near that iron star, instead of hitting the commander, are likely to take out the loader. Again, ammo rack toward the rear of the turret, hull ammo rack here, fuel tanks at the back, and engine at the front. So quite a lot of this tank is critical modules that you can damage. It's a large profile for artillery to hit, but it's nothing that unusual. So, let's move on to the armour scheme. Just before talking about the armour profile itself, I will mention that the gun depression on the Tiger II is 8 degrees all round. There's a bit of a blip at the back where it's only 5, but most of the time it's 8 degrees, which is perfectly respectable. It's not amazing, but it's decent enough to get the job done. So, the armour. First thing to note, the sides and rear of the Tiger II are 80mm thick. Now most of that is relatively flat. There's a little bit of sloping on the side here, but it's nothing to really get too excited about. What is more notable, however, is the sloping on the rear of the hull. Which means given a half decent angle, if you're getting shot at by light tanks, they can actually bounce off the rear of your hull, which can be quite amusing. So bear that in mind. It's not something to rely upon, but it's something that can happen. If you look at the side armour, 80mm plus a bit of angling. If you angle this as optimally as you can kind of squeeze just over 200mm on the front and the side, but you're not really going to get any more than that. If you're side scraping around a corner, of course, you can have a nice extreme angle to get a bounce off, but then your turret becomes a problem, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. So, if we look at the frontal armour of this tank, you've got 150mm upper front plate, sloped back at about 40 degrees, giving you just over 200 of effective armour, 200mm. In practice, I find, generally speaking, it's not a good idea to try and shoot the Tiger II in the upper front plate with most tanks, unless you're a much higher tier where you have very high penetration. Generally speaking, not a great plan. It only takes sort of a little bit of angling back to make this thicker and thicker, effectively. However, you then have the lower front plate, which is good to bounce lower tiers. I mean, when people hit around about 170mm, it starts being relatively easy for them to penetrate this, unless they're at very close range, in which case the angle gets considerably, the angle makes the armor considerably thicker. However, to most of the guns this thing is going to be facing, most of the time they will be able to penetrate your lower front plate at pretty much any angle, so do bear that in mind. And of course you have transmission back here, so that can be really quite painful. When we talk about the turret, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The gun mantler isn't bad. It's around about 200 to 300mm thick, give or take. So it can bounce shots, but the turret face is only 185mm thick, with minimal angling, and so that means a gun with, you know, 200 pen, say, as long as the shot's aimed fairly well, won't struggle to go through the front of the turret. So straight through the front of the turret is viable. Of course, if they miss, they might hit the gun mantler, which will probably bounce off. These side cheeks are sloped back at a sufficient angle to be an auto bounce angle, so there is that. The turret front isn't bad, but it's not the best. You've got a commander's hatch up here, which is actually remarkably strong. It's around 150mm thick. But of course it will angle back and slope and all that jazz, making it quite a tricky target. Then we get to one of the big frustrating bits of the Tiger II. A lot of the common guns you face as a tier 8 will be 120mm, 122mm guns, that sort of thing, especially from the Soviets. The turret roof on the Tiger II is 40mm thick. Now, it's sloped back enough to generally bounce those shots, so it's not much of an issue. However, only 40mm thick means a gun that's 120mm in caliber or higher will triple overmatch this and will go straight through. So that means that those, I mean, sometimes this refers to higher tier guns. You know, there's a lot of 120mm guns on the tier 9 and 10 heavy tanks, for example, and some of the tank destroyers. But they could penetrate you anyway. Where this really matters is when you're talking about kind of those 175 pen, 390 alpha Soviet 122mm guns that you get from tier 6 and upwards, and the Chinese guns, to be fair, as well, but mainly the Soviets. They will overmatch this roof. If you've seen a video I put up a little while back where I was playing the 112, that's the Chinese tier 8 premium heavy tank, I took horrible advantage of this. This means that if you are driving, you know, a humble IS, an SU-100, you can aim for this turret roof with your regular armor-piercing ammo, and it's a big fat target. If you hit it, you'll penetrate it, no questions asked, which can be quite frustrating. So, all things considered, the armor on the Tiger II is okay, but not great. It's fine against lower tiers. Against equal or higher tiers, it starts really struggling quite quickly. The armor isn't really the selling point of this tank, is what I'm saying. Anyway, let's go and have a look at some gameplay. Alright, time for a little bit of gameplay then, and as those of you who've been watching these reviews for any length of time will be expecting, there will be one video, or one game, where we're top tier in the Tiger II, and one where we are bottom tier, trying to give you an idea of how the tank performs in each situation. So, for starters, we are here on, it's a tier 8 game, so this is the top tier game, and we are on, is this Cliff? Yes, the Cliff map. And if we have a look at the distribution of the sorts of tanks we've got on each team, we can see that the enemy team has a slight advantage in heavy tanks. We have a slight advantage in mediums and tank destroyers, and there's one light tank per team. No artillery in this game, by the way, which is nice because the Tiger II is one of those tanks that doesn't really take artillery very well. So that was nice. Now, if you're on the cliff map here, it's another one of those maps where there's an area of the map that's good to go and an area of the map that's bad to go. Basically, if the 1 and 2 lines, generally speaking, are places people go to die. Hello, Mr. Panther. They are not very good places to go. I mean, if you drive down the 1 and 2 lines with the aim of driving up at sort of around E2, E3, and then getting shots on people, yeah, sure, that works. But if all you're going to do is sit down those 1 and 2 lines and kind of camp and snipe people and poke around corners, it's not a good place to go on this map. A bit like the Valley on Lakeville, for example, it doesn't tend to go well for you. And if you actually look at the minimap, you'll notice that's where most of our team are, which is a little bit suboptimal. So I'm going over to the 9 line here with our T-54 Mod 1, try and back him up, and we're going to see if we can shoot some bad guys in the face. Now, I mentioned, hello Mr. IS-6, the armour on the Tiger II isn't the best, but against the 175 penetration of an IS-6 at relatively long range, it will do a reasonable job. Now remember, the best spot, I guess, for the IS-6 to be shooting at if he's firing regular armor-piercing ammo is my turret roof, and this is long enough range, and I'm giving him little enough time to aim that those shots are not trivial. Hello, Mr. FCM. We've got a shot into you as well. Now, what you can see here is that I'm barely letting the gun aim. Moving forward, taking my shot and pulling back. In fact, it's not entirely dissimilar to what you might do in some medium tanks. And the relatively good aiming stats on the Tiger II's gun allows you to do this. It's kind of what you also end up doing in the Carnarvon. And it's kind of trying to make the best of your armour. The armour is alright, provided you don't let them aim at you properly, and there goes my trap. If you do let them aim at you properly, then you can have some problems. Now, I just bounced a shot from a Lerva, which I must admit I was not expecting. I found that very surprising. His 230-something millimeters of penetration will generally go through me like butter. So that was a nice surprise. That shot doesn't even hit its target, but again, I'm not letting the enemy fully aim their gun. I'm just taking the shot and backing off. And there's that Lerva, aiming for the turret cheeks on the Lerva as they're slightly weak, and we're rewarded with a penetration. Now, the Lerva has a reputation for having a good gun, but actually, if you look at it, the Tiger II's gun is the better of the two. Finally, we're rewarded with a kill as we take out Dark Brothers in his FCM 50-ton. And keep pushing upward. We need this IS-6. That was never going to do the job. And the Lerva to die. Get my gun damaged. Managed to use the repair kit to put that back in. That one bounces as well because IS-6. And this is a patch 9.12 game, so I believe it's before the IS-6 got buffed, because the IS-6 really needed a buff. That was very unlikely to penetrate. I probably shouldn't have even bothered with the shot, but I thought, I penetrated the Lerva last time. Why not? Let's give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? Nope, that's not going to penetrate. Now, I went for those turret cheeks again, but alas, I wasn't able to actually hit my shot. If you look at the minimap, our team is successfully pushing through the rest of the map, which is nice. There goes the IS-6. It's good that they didn't just camp the 1 and 2 lines, because as it is, myself and this T-54 have been kind of outnumbered on this side of the map for most of the game. It's been the two of us versus at least 3 opponents that we know of. The Lerva, the IS-6, and the FCM 50T. Now, as it is, the M6 and the Tiger II on the enemy team are both in the middle of the map. The Lerva is over by us, and that just leaves a Jackson, who was last spotted on the 1 and 2 lines. So, I'm fairly confident I can push here into the Lerva, and if push comes to the shove, I have more health than he does, and a better rate of fire, and hence, with the same alpha damage, better DPM than the Löwe does. So if push comes to shove, if the two of us were to just stand in front of each other and shoot each other, I should win that engagement. However, well, I take out his tracks, he takes out mine. I guess I can't complain too much. Seeing if I can pick out a second shot, go for the commander's hatch, but it's really small on the Löwe, and as it is, we don't land that shot flush, and we don't penetrate. So, going for the rear of his tank, there we go, there's a penetration. And this guy just has 870 health left. As I say, I could just go out there and, you know, shoot him, but we could just do a DPM trade, but I don't see any reason to do that. He manages to penetrate me once there. I should reload before he does, but that is quite a steep angle, so my shot bounces, but his shot goes into my tracks. So, although I said the armour on this tank isn't fantastic, it did actually hold up fairly well this game. Someone else manages to take the guy out, and that finishes the game off. So we didn't really do anything particularly spectacular there. We were just fighting our position, fought our way down the 8-9 lines on the cliff map, and managed to take the fight to the enemy. But we were facing off against top tier tanks on the enemy team as well. So of all the tanks the enemy had who could penetrate us, they were some of the ones who had the best chance. And actually, as long as you didn't let the enemy aim too much at your weak spots, keep moving, angle your armour, the armour actually held up fairly well in this game. So let's just go and have a look and see exactly how well it held up. Alright, so in the end that game was worth first class mastery, Battle Brothers, but don't worry about that, shellproof, fire for effect, and steel wall. We finished second on our team by experience with 2,968 damage done, 2 kills and 1,085 base XP. 21 shots fired, 18 hits, 11 pens. Bearing in mind I wasn't aiming my shots a lot of the time for that damage count, most of which was from relatively close range. We received 17 hits, of which 2 penetrated and 15 did not, for 3,870 damage blocked by our armour. So, I included this replay because I have stated the armour is not great on this tank, but I didn't want you to think the armour was completely terrible. You can get good results with the armour on the Tiger II, but you shouldn't be surprised if it fails you and you get penetrated quite a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We didn't travel that far, made a bit of a profit into the bargain. 105mm ammunition is not particularly cheap, just over 1,000 credits a shot, and got a reasonable amount of XP into the bargain as well. So let's move on to our second game. Here then is the second game that I promised you, and as I said, this is a tier 10 game, and not just a tier 10 game. If you look at the team lists, approximately half of each team are tier 10 with 7 tanks per side. So this is one of those games where you're going to have to be very careful. We're also here on Redshire, which is a big, wide, open map. Now, I am not going to treat the Tiger II as a heavy tank in this game, because going up against E100s, IS4s and IS7s is a surefire way to soon end up with a wrecked tank. And thus, I was thinking of going up to sort of F4, G5 kind of region to throw some supporting fire in, but I saw on the minimap I got a trio of rather naddy tank destroyers moving up there, and they really don't need me getting in the way. So, instead, we're going to head over to the 1 and 2 lines and see if we can push down here. Now, we've got an M48 Patton going with us. And there's a couple of tank destroyers in the background. There's an ISU and a Jagdpanther 2. They may only be tier 8, but they still have very scary guns, providing support. So depending on how much resistance we meet up here, we might be able to push forward, or if we have to play more defensively, we've got a couple of big guns behind us to give the enemy a bad time. I think I take a punt at this T54, T54, because why not? Its shot doesn't really go anywhere near, but what have I got to lose? And we're just going to come over here with the M48 Patton, and I am not expecting to be the star of this flank or anything. In my head, my purpose here is just to provide support for our Patton. I'm a tier 8. He's a tier 10. He has a better gun than me, he has more health than me, etc, etc, etc. So I'm just going to watch his bomb, basically. Make sure he doesn't get outnumbered, overwhelmed, swarmed, anything like that. Hello, Mr. Korean Pattern. Now, Korean Pattern in this situation is a good tank, but I have the armor advantage, I have the gun advantage, I have pretty much every advantage in this sort of engagement. And there's his little platoon friend, so we'll put a shot into him as well. Wouldn't be surprised if the T-54 Mod 1 were in the vicinity, as the three of them are in a platoon. And we know there's also a Centurion, Action X, and an E-75 over here, though the E-75 has taken a bit of a pasting already. Got 2 penetrating shots in. Wonder if we can get any more. Maybe, maybe not. As I said, I'm just here trying to cover my M48 Pattern buddy. He's more important than I am, and so I'm going to try and shoot things and block things and generally make a nuisance of myself and cover his rear. He's decided to move up here, so I'm going to move up with him. And hey look, it's a Korean Pattern. Hopefully these guys aren't going to swarm sucker us, and if they do, there's quite a few friendly tank destroyers in the vicinity that could give them pause for thought, so this isn't quite as aggressive as it may at first seem. Having said that, the team is down 3 tanks already. Hurrah, one of which is one of our tier 10s, which is not a particularly great start, but there we go. M48 Pattern is really going for it, so I'm going to go and back him up. We really can't afford to lose another tier 10 tank. Korean Pattern, don't bother stopping, on the move, put a shot into the side of his turret and take up a position kind of behind him, side scraping here, and that was about the only place on the Korean Pattern that I could have bounced, but there we go. C'est la vie. Maybe we'll be able to nail him with the next shot, and there we go, that's one dead Pattern. Scoreline is 1-4. Our Pattern has taken a little bit of a pounding. I take a shot there, but unfortunately when I'm having a go at the T-54, he backs off just in the nick of time so that my shot bounces harmlessly off of his highly angled upper front plate. Our Pattern, the M48, takes out the E-75, and suddenly the scoreline isn't looking too bad. Put a shot into the T-54 Mod 1, don't get hit in return, which is always nice. And I'm just going to side scrape around this corner and see what I can do about him. With the Tiger 2, you really do want to side scrape at every available opportunity. He blows my tracks off, I take off a chunk of his health, just wiggling the turret a little bit so that hopefully he can't shoot my commander's hatch. He does, however, put another shot in, and I'm able to finish him off. Scoreline is 7-5, as our Jagdpanther 2 takes out the M46, the other M46 Korean Pattern. So, we're on 2 kills. It's not looking too bad, but if you look at the minimap, you may notice that we only have 1 tank remaining on the other flank, and that is our IS-7. All the others have gone to the Great Graveyard in the sky. Oh, hello, Mr. Centurion. There we go. He's feeling the hurt now. Now, our IS-7 has succumbed, and so our base is completely open. The prudent thing now would be to go back and defend it. Now, I don't know what part I'm actually going to be playing in that defense. I don't know if I'm going to be mainly doing shooting, spotting, or what. I have absolutely no idea, but either way, I'm heading back. Our Pattern is continuing on and taking out some of the enemy artillery and whatnot. Which is not a bad thing to do in and of itself. Our tank destroyers are also pushing on, so this leaves myself, an Object 261 and an ISU 152 to defend the base against a T-49 that we know of, and potentially a couple of fairly mean heavy tanks. And, ooh, someone just blatted the T-49 in the face. I think that might have been our artillery, but I'm not quite sure. Could have been the ISU, of course. Damage roll, it could have been a slightly low roll from the ISU. Either way, T-49 got blatted, got tracked, and then the ISU executed him. So we don't have to worry about him. Scoreline is 12-7. There's just the 3 of them remaining. There's the E-100 on just under 500 health. Oh, but there goes our Jagdpanzer E-100. AMX-50B turns up with that 4-round autoloader. He's very dangerous, quickly executes 2 tanks, but takes a right real pasting for the trouble. And our M48 Pattern, remember him, puts in a long range shot to finish the guy off. 2 tanks remaining on the enemy team. We've of course got that Centurion and the E100 who we saw a few moments ago. Now if you look at the tanks remaining on our team, we've got a Jagdpanzer E100, who's a one-shot, M48 Patton, who's taken a bit of damage, Jagdpanther 2 and an ISU, they don't have a huge amount of health to start with, me of course, and an artillery piece. Now against these two tanks, you'd think we should have this, but don't forget both of their tanks are top tier, and well, their Centurion might have a good amount of health left, so it really depends. And this game could still go the other way. I have a punt at the E100, but my shot bounces off. As it turns out, the Centurion doesn't have a huge amount of health left, which is good, but our E100 has killed the M48 Patton. So this has become a slightly dicey situation. I mean, both the E100 and the Centurion are on relatively low health, but even so, this isn't necessarily optimal. Centurion action 10, nah, he's behind a hill, I can't get a shot on him. He puts a shot into our Jagdpanther 2 though, and this engagement between him and the Jagdpanther 2 could go south very quickly. In fact, actually, he's reduced the Jagdpanther to a one-shot, and yeah, this could be problematic. There's the E100 coming around for our Jagdpanzer E100, and he finishes the guy off. Meanwhile, I'm still up here. Now, why am I still up here? I thought I would have some shots on the E100 in particular, and hopefully the Centurion as well. But as it turns out, they were behind cover, and so I wasn't able to do a damned thing, which is a bit of a shame. Jagdpanther 2 is moving up toward the Centurion's last known position. A little bit risky, because if the Centurion wants to, and he's close by, he could potentially get round the flank, and there's only one shot left in that Jagdpanther anyway. Jagdpanther, sorry. Jagdpanther 2 if you want to be pedantic. And now, well, it's two tier 10s versus an artillery piece, the tier is almost irrelevant, and a trio of tier 8s, so yeah, this could be a little bit dicey. E100 gets spotted, and I switch over to APCR because I really want these shots to count. I want that E100 to die, and I want to minimise the chances that I'm going to bounce off the guy. Centurion action 10 does indeed manage to nail our Jagdpanther 2, and suddenly 3 plays 2. This has just become a little bit dicey. So, I'm going to take the long way round. I don't want to be spotted myself. I don't just want to drive straight into them, because that seems like a terrible idea. Instead, we're going to go all the way around and see if we can find these guys. If I come across the E100, then I should hopefully be able to put a shot into him. 285 penetration with these APCR rounds is not too shabby. If I come across the Centurion, he's a one-shot. And if I can light them up for the ISU 152 and the Object 261, then all the better. They both have far larger guns than I do. I really have to play the Scout in this scenario. And you can see there, trying to get up the hill, the kind of underwhelming engine power that the Tiger II has. The top speed, as I say, is fairly respectable, but that raw engine grunt leaves a little to be desired. It's kind of a bit like the opposite of a lot of the British tanks, which tend to have a rather underwhelming top speed, but the engines have quite a lot of grunt in them. So yeah, it seems to kind of be, as I say, the opposite to that. Haven't spotted out anyone yet, and I'm kind of prevaricating here a little bit if memory serves. Not really sure what I'm going to do. I'm just going to speed this along a little bit, because watching a Tiger II drive around drive around Redshire is not the most exciting experience in the world. Now, I notice the time is ticking down, and so I decide to make a go for the enemy capture circle, but I run into a Centurion Action X in the process. 3 minutes left on this game. Now, I can kill the Centurion Action X with one shot. It will take him, on average, 3 shots to kill me. So the fact that I have the health advantage is rather nice. And arguably I also, well, in some senses have the armour advantage, in some senses less so. The ISU is coming round. Hopefully together we can take out this Centurion and the E100 if necessary, or we can just sit in the capture circle and giggle, which would also be nice. Can we find this guy? There's the E100. Oh good lord, there's the Centurion. That was a large caliber gun, it could have been anyone. Trying to come up behind the E100. Looks like the ISU has taken a right royal pasting. He's probably taken a hit from that E100. Centurion Action X takes out the ISU, but our Object 261 nails the E100 in the process. That just leaves myself versus this Centurion. We've got artillery support, so let's just go over and kill this guy. And move on from there. Speed this up a little bit. He's around here somewhere. There he is, and he's dead. And that's the game. Let's go and have a look at the results. So that was enough for First Class Mastery, Duelist, and Fire for Effects. 2,618 damage done, 3 kills, 1,091 base experience, which in a tier 10 game is not too shabby. 13 shots fired, 12 hits, 9 pens for that damage count. A little bit of damage blocked by our armour, but nothing really that special. We spent a little bit more on ammunition because I did fire 1 round of APCR right at the end, though as it turned out it wasn't necessary. Armor piercing would have would have done the job. Still a bit of a profit though, and a reasonable amount of experience into the bargain. So there's the gameplay. Let's go and have a little chat back in the garage. So all things considered, what do I think about the Tiger II? So there's what my head tells me and there's what my heart tells me, if you will, my impression of it from playing it. From playing this machine, I've found it to be a rather uninspiring, mediocre tank, with nothing really to recommend it. The armour is certainly not there. I mean, if you ever show anyone your lower plate, don't be surprised if you get penetrated. If anyone has a 122mm gun, don't be surprised if they penetrate your turret roof. You know, there are loads of weak spots on this tank. Big weak spots. And even those spots that aren't particularly weak can be penetrated by tanks that are kind of your same tier, and we're not talking tank destroyers here, like the turret from. The gun, I've never found it to be massively exciting, but so that's the thing. My gut instinct is that this is not a particularly inspiring tank, but when you look at the numbers and when you actually look at the stats of the tank, it appears to have a very good gun. So I would say this is a good gun on a very mediocre platform, which is true of a lot of tanks. The problem with tanks that are a good gun on a mediocre platform is that often they get relegated to support duty, and I fear that's a little bit true of the Tiger II. It doesn't have the armour of the 110 or the IS-3 to brawl colossally effectively, and that really is the current meta, a lot of brawling. It doesn't have the excellent gun depression. I mean, the gun depression isn't bad, but it doesn't have the sublime gun depression and monstrous turret frontal armour of the T-32 to go hull down and just bully people. I mean, it's better than the Carnarvon. Yay! But the Carnarvon's not very good. The AMX, of course, has that autoloader, so the two are nothing alike, not even vaguely comparable. There's the VKA that's generally not liked, but I had more fun in the VKA, if I'm honest, than I've had so far in the Tiger II. It's not that the Tiger II is a bad machine, it's not, but I think it really does struggle to leave its mark, to leave its impression on the game or on you. So, I think it's a good gun on a mediocre platform, and the overall package that you get from the thing is kind of meh. It's a very forgettable tank, put it that way. And I know for some people it's the Tiger II, and that's an important feature, and that's fine. But when it comes to how it performs in game, like I say, I find it very... It's alright, as I say, kind of forgettable. Maybe that's a little bit of a shame, but there we go, that's how I find it. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who love the thing, however, and if you do, I wish you all the best with it. Anyway, I hope you guys found that review vaguely informative or entertaining. If you did, by all means, feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.